Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to another episode of First Generation Flyers, where I share my journey of recovery from emotional trauma to heal my soul. I'm your host, Vay, and as a reminder, I'm not a licensed professional. I'm just sharing my personal experiences in hopes to help someone else along their journey of life. Today, I'll be talking about matters of the heart and the influence of trauma and heartbreak. In the last episode, I introduced Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we talked about how unmet lower-level deficiency needs, basic and psychological, can become a hindrance to our growth. We worked our way down the pyramid to uncover the gaps in my foundation that kept me from reaching self-actualization, which we defined as achieving one's full potential to include creative activities. We learned that my unmet physiological needs, namely rest or lack thereof, was the culprit responsible for my own stunted growth, blocked creativity, and overall unhappiness in life. Therapy helped me uncover that this hole created intimacy issues and initiated a disconnect from myself. And if I wanted any chance of winning this game called life and making it to the promised land, aka unlocking my higher level growth needs to reach self-actualization, I would have to recover the pieces of myself that got lost. The first thing I needed to do is understand all of the characters in this game: heart, mind, and soul, because their health was directly responsible for the direction of my spirit, which is what gives us our desire to live. In the last episode, I talked about how I saw Maslow's hierarchy as a metaphorical representation of our physical outer world and spiritual inner world. And to better understand each character, I had to see the board from a different angle, because as it stood, my characters were on 3 different levels, ultimately disconnected from one another. My heart was at the lowest level, basic needs. My mind was in the middle, psychological needs. And my soul was torn between the two, which is why I couldn't move to the next level, self-fulfillment. So instead of looking at those levels as a hierarchical structure of top to bottom and vice versa, I rotated the view of the board so that everything was on one level. Like the saying goes, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So if my heart was at the lowest level, then that's where I needed to level set. That's where the rest of me needed to go to figure out why she was still there and how she got stuck in the first place. The heart is the bridge that connects and transports us between physical and spiritual worlds. It's the key that unlocks the gates to the promised land. When the heart is blocked or cut off, then so are we. The spiritual world is home to our invisible selves. It is in this realm that our deepest desires and fears are translated as dreams and nightmares. It is where our imagination, or lack thereof, shape our lives and human experiences in the physical world. Now, the physical world, which we see as 3-dimensional here on Earth, is where these fears and desires manifest in tangible form. So everything we do on Earth is a direct reflection of whatever is happening behind the curtain of our spiritual world with our invisible selves. If we're going through hell on the inside, or avoiding the inside because of nightmares or afraid of what's to come, then that's reflected in our daily lives. We're angry, irritable, frustrated, stressed, and numbed by the distractions in the physical realm. But on the other side of that coin, if we're at peace on the inside, we're able to dream, we're able to create and innovate, and that's reflected in the physical world in the form of peace, love, joy, elevation, and a desire to spread positive energy to make the world a better place. Since the heart is the portal to this world that holds our invisible self, when it's closed off or the energy to and from is blocked, we prevent pain from escaping and love from entering, causing us to suffer and subconsciously project that hurt into the world. Now, we'll get more into the spiritual realm in a later episode, but for now, we'll primarily focus on its effects of the heart in the physical realm. Now, they say home is where the heart is. And our first home, where we grew up with the people who first loved us, is what shapes our future experiences in life. It is where we first learn how to love and how to be loved. So let's talk about heart's home, inside of basic needs. The residual effects of slavery through discrimination and systemic racism still affect a lot of Black American families today through cycles of poverty, illiteracy, and mental illness. My focus, however, is the cyclical trauma that evolved from it and the generational effects it had on our homes, thus our hearts, keeping us stuck in a loop of survival. The lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy is physiological needs. These basic needs are biological requirements for human survival. Oxford Languages define survival as the state or fact of continuing to live or exist, typically in spite of an accident, ordeal, or difficult circumstances. Survival is our most basic instincts as humans, and self-preservation is the first rule of natural law. Historically, my family has spent generations living and dying at this level as a result of difficult circumstances. Cycles of unresolved trauma, abuse, and miseducation in the home prevented them from fully satisfying their basic needs, leaving us stuck in a never-ending loop of survival. However, with each new generation, there's an opportunity to start at a new level. But if we're starting at that level with an unstable foundation from the beginning, it's only a matter of time before we go falling through that hole and ending up right back at the bottom. And I was the first of a new generation in my family who was anxious to fly. But no one warned me about the fall. In my world, the basic needs level of Maslow's pyramid was about finding stability. I watched my mother struggle to provide me with stability in my formative years while trying to maintain those things for herself by herself. Like me, my mother came from a broken home. For whatever reasons, neither here nor there, our fathers were not in the home, leaving us with alternative perspectives of what a family unit should look like. The absence of our fathers not only left a hole in the home, but a hole in the heart as we grew to learn that they were somewhere else making another family whole. Now, if you think of the heart as two halves, and those halves being symbolic of wings, like bird or angel wings used to fly, then essentially, we were trying to fly with one wing, that of our mothers, and that's nearly impossible. But Black mothers always had a way of making the impossible possible. My mother, nor any of the women in my family, has ever been the type to let anyone or anything stop them from doing whatever it is they set out to do. They just picked up whatever pieces they could and continued to survive. That strategy worked for a while, but at a cost, right? We'd gotten used to surviving without fathers by picking up their load in the place of rest. The strong, independent Black woman who does it all. My mother never complained directly about the stress of working 2 and 3 jobs, struggling to find childcare, or providing food, shelter, and clothing for a toddler, all while trying to figure out this thing called life. She watched her mother do it with 4 kids after her parents split when she was 6, so she had nothing to complain about with just 1. Now, Oxford Languages define trauma as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Psychology today also acknowledges the traumatic impacts of poverty on the brain. Because trauma in the Black community has historically been ignored or dismissed on a universal scale, Black people have been conditioned to invalidate and dismiss our own traumatic experiences, including trauma within our homes or within our families at large. But when we don't take the necessary steps to recover from our trauma in a healthy way, it gets stuck in our body and can severely impact our emotional and psychological development. When I was doing some digging into my family history on my grandmother's side, I learned that my great-grandmother lost her father when she was just 15 years old. 10 years later, she lost her husband to gun violence when my grandmother was just 5. My granny used to tell my mother that he was the only person who ever truly loved her, so his death left her with not only a broken home, but a broken heart as well. So the cycle of broken homes and broken hearts in my family was one that we simply accepted as a way of life. It was something we had no control over, so there was no need in making a big fuss about it. But as I grew older, I found it interesting that my mother and aunt seemed unaffected by the absence of their father. Because by the time I reached puberty, I was angry at mine. Tupac and Outlaw's Hit 'em Up style type angry. How were they able to just let that go? How did they deal with the feeling of not being good enough for your father to not choose you? It was one thing to have a father who split before you were born or was just a deadbeat all around. Out of sight, out of mind, I could have made do with. But it's a different type of mindfuck when you watch your father be a father to someone else while telling you he can't help you when you're in need. The most powerful beliefs we have about ourselves are beliefs we picked up from our family before we even reached kindergarten. Research has shown that the first 5 years of a child's life is a pivotal period in their learning and development. And by the time they're 8 years old, they've already reached emotional regulation and attachment styles. That time period frames how we make decisions and interact with other people for the rest of our lives. Just those first 5 to 8 years of life. That means if a child has already developed a core belief that they aren't good enough, that they're burdensome, or that they're generally unwanted by the time they're 8 years old, regardless of what the reality is, then every life experience they have on top of that will be skewed to accommodate that belief until they learn to believe otherwise. It is this early where self-esteem issues begin to rise within us and affect our behavior throughout childhood and adolescent development and become the foundation of our adult personalities. In the Black community, we wear our trauma like a badge of honor. It's the ultimate measure of our strength. How much pain can we take? Oh, is that all you going through? I've been through worse. That ain't nothing to complain about. It's like a competition. Back in the days our parents were coming up, there was nothing else to do with all of that hurt and pain but use it as a way to connect and to drive you. There was no therapy, there was no mental health, there was no emotional support to deal with the physical and psychological trauma that was happening inside of many of the homes in our communities. Domestic violence, sexual assault, or any other physical and verbal abuse. There was no such thing as healing. There were only pieces of themselves they decided to do away with or disassociate themselves from because crying over something you couldn't control wasn't going to put food on the table. It wasn't going to pay the rent. And most importantly, it wasn't going to change anything because that was just how life went in that world. But the reality is, trauma doesn't go away just because we elect to ignore it. Newton's first law of energy states that energy is never created or destroyed, it is simply transferred. Instead, it gets stuck inside of our bodies. And those pieces of ourselves that we left by the wayside actually become hardened shells of negative energy that lie dormant in our bodies until we're triggered. And that negative energy is then subconsciously released and directed toward people and situations that we can control because we couldn't control the source of that pain. So while my mother never consciously complained about the stressors of being a struggling single mother, as the only person in her life she could control and who lived with her, I was the easiest target for her to expel that energy toward. And with nowhere else to place this, it became dormant inside of me. And because she was my best friend and I had nothing else to compare it to, this gave me the perception that love could not be experienced without pain. Although it's often associated with romantic relationships, struggle love refers to a relationship where one partner experiences long-term stress as a result of the other partner's actions or inactions during their relationship. It's any relationship where one partner is waiting for the other partner to choose to respect and honor their relationship. I associated this type of love with being raised on survival because it wasn't very warm and it wasn't always comforting, but it was there. And it held you together enough to keep surviving. As humans, we need to feel that we belong and we need to feel loved. But coming from an environment of broken homes and broken hearts creates a belief that we don't deserve better. So we take whatever we can get, including conditional love or love that only comes with pain, just to have something to hold on to keep us from falling apart. Parents and caregivers are our first teachers and examples of what love looks like. And as we grow older, we use that foundation of love to build our relationships with others. Each generation of my family struggled to build a healthy foundation of love because no one knew what it looked like, thus perpetuating repeated cycles of struggle love, both in and outside of the home. That's why we were loners. When your heart has been broken so many times and you've become intimately acquainted with heartache and disappointment, it's easier to just take life on life's terms. And my family found that being alone is where it was most safe. We didn't trust anybody else, not even each other. My mother had a tough exterior due to her upbringing, which conditioned her to hide her emotions and build a wall around her heart. Money was a big stressor in my home, and I couldn't be mad at her because she'd been through enough as it was. And all she did was work to make sure I had the things that she never had, which were the essentials to our survival. And I couldn't tell her I didn't need them because I did. But I needed her too. But I couldn't have her the way I needed her because she needed to work to be able to take care of us. With nowhere else to place my anger, I'd grown up to resent my father. I didn't think it was fair that he didn't have to work and could pick and choose when he wanted to be a parent to me, while my mother carried the burden of taking care of me by herself. At 13, I spent a lot of time wondering why she didn't just abort me. Why was I even here? It was a conflicting feeling because it wasn't like I had a bad childhood. My mother worked to give me everything I wanted and then some. but it always felt as if it took so much out of her to give me those things. And I just wanted her to be happy because I thought she deserved to be happy. The only emotion my mother knew how to authentically express was anger when things didn't go her way, or empathy for people stuck in a struggle trying to make a way. There wasn't much in between. Her idea of love was providing me with the essentials of life and protecting me from abusive men as a child. These were things I thought were basic requirements of a parent. However, because I didn't grow up in the same environment as she did, I couldn't relate to that idea of love. Without experiencing the same abuse or pain on the other side of it, a lot of times that love just felt cold and mechanical. When love is directly tied to your survival, you learn to view it as transactional and how to manipulate emotions to ensure your survival needs are met. Now, if your parents or caregivers use food, shelter, physical safety, emotional withholding, or any other means to survive as a disciplinary tool, and they're your only source of meeting those needs, then you'll do and say whatever you think they need to hear to ensure your survival and safety. Me and my mother were very close growing up because it was always just the two of us. She took care of my physical needs, and I was there to support her emotionally. Codependency is a circular relationship in which one person needs the other person who in turn needs to be needed. These types of relationships usually lack boundaries and include an inability to have an opinion to say no. They're often centered around an imbalance of power. In these types of relationships, the person who is doing the giving feels worthless unless they're needed and often makes sacrifices for others at the expense of their own needs. Codependency was the foundation for how I loved due to core beliefs I developed at an early age that I wasn't wanted by my father and that I was a burden to my mother and the root cause of all her stress. In my mind, if she didn't have to take care of me, she wouldn't be so stressed and unhappy all of the time. So by the time I was 11 or 12, I started trying to make money on my own to take care of myself, to try and make life easier for her. But by the time I was in high school and started to become my own person, our relationship began to change. It seemed that she didn't like the person I was becoming. She still saw me as a child and capable of making decisions for myself instead of an independent young woman that this life forced me to become. We couldn't see eye to eye, and tensions from environmental and money stress fueled conflict between us. This made me fearful of doing or saying the wrong thing at any given time to avoid a blow up or any other confrontation, creating a persistent feeling of anxiety inside of the home. Because at any given moment, she held the power to take my world away. Anxiety is a feeling of fear, dread, or uneasiness. And while anxiety itself can be a normal reaction to stress, anxiety disorders occur when it doesn't go away, worsen over time, or create changes in behavior. Eventually, I learned to tell her what I thought she wanted to hear, even if it wasn't true, to avoid conflict or potential abandonment altogether. And that was hard for me because I was a sensitive kid and I didn't like to lie. But I hated conflict and what it resulted in even more. That made me a people pleaser. So that sensitive kid turned into a hardened shell of negative energy, which created a false version of myself because I had a false sense of security. But we needed one another. So regardless of the drama, we held on to one another. This was the genesis of my codependent, unhealthy attachment style, which contributed to the low self-esteem already in development. When we look to the people that are supposed to comfort and protect us, and they fail to do so for whatever reason, intentional or not, and they are the source of what hurts, they set the stage for our relationship with love and our relationship with self until we decide we want something better. For us first-generation flyers raised on survival, a lot of our parents are victims of physical and psychological trauma from childhood who never got a chance to acknowledge their hurt or process their pain. As that negative energy became stored inside of them with nowhere else to go, we essentially became a sounding board for the emotions our parents were never allowed to express. And that left us with what I call secondhand trauma, or what the psychology field calls emotional trauma, that we didn't understand. All they could do was love us as best as they could with the pieces of themselves they had left. And we took the spears because we loved our parents. We knew the things they'd been through. But that left our generation to spend our adolescent and adult years trying to figure out the best way to ease our pain. A pain that ached so deep that we didn't understand because it didn't seem to have a source. We didn't even know why we were hurting. We didn't know why we were angry. We didn't know why we had such a strained relationship with love. All we could do is just try to be there for them as best as we could, like they did for us. Trauma bonding is a psychological response to abuse or neglect. It occurs when the neglected person forms an unhealthy bond with the person who neglects them. The person experiencing the neglect may develop sympathy for the abusive person, which becomes reinforced by a cycle of abuse or neglect followed by remorse. Trauma bonds are the result of an unhealthy attachment. As humans, we naturally form attachments as a means of survival. Children become attached to their parents or caregivers whom they depend on, and adults form attachments to others who provide comfort or support. When your main source of support is also the person that hurts or neglects you, a trauma bond can be formed. A person may also develop a trauma bond because they rely on the neglectful person to fulfill emotional needs. For example, a child relies on their parent or caregiver for love and support. If that caregiver is abusive, dismissive, or emotionally neglectful, the child may come to associate those traits with love. Believing that this association is normal, the child may be unable to see the abusive caregiver as bad, and the child may instead blame themselves for the abuse and neglect that they receive as a way of making sense of what's happening to them. This allows the caregiver to continue to be good in the child's eyes, which reinforces their bond. Because our parents are our first love, we spend a lot of time seeking their approval, validation, and their love in general. But when our parents are emotionally unavailable, that leaves us emotionally neglected and with feelings of emptiness and unworthiness, as we spend a majority of our time, and in some cases our entire lives, trying to heal hearts we didn't break. That didn't leave us much room to heal our own. Broken homes lead to broken hearts, and broken hearts are the root of broken trust. If you come from survival, chances are you got trust issues as a result of a false sense of security. Because for whatever reason, the people who were supposed to take care of you or protect you either didn't or they couldn't. And only you can determine what makes you feel safe or not. It's hard to be at ease when you're constantly living on edge or in fear of not only what can happen to you outside of the home, but what can happen inside as well. And if nowhere is safe, not even home, then what do you do with that? Post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. Symptoms are generally grouped into 4 types: intrusive memories, avoidance, negative changes in thinking and mood, and changes in physical and emotional reactions. Untreated PTSD may increase the risk of other mental health problems, such as depression and anxiety, issues with drugs or alcohol use, eating disorders, and suicidal thoughts and actions. While PTSD has historically been associated with soldiers in combat, recent studies have also linked PTSD to children growing up in poverty or high-stress environments. So you see, struggling not only to survive, but also to love was just in my DNA. And by the time I got to college, I had already begun to lose pieces of myself. I was already trying to fly with one wing. And when I graduated, the last confrontation with my mother broke something inside of me completely, and my other wing had gone missing, leaving me to spend the next several years of my life trying to find my way off the ground. Because if the only thing I've ever known as my source of comfort and support was gone, then my greatest fears were realized. What I thought of myself all of this time was true. I just wasn't good enough to be loved. Now, I was cool with my father not wanting me because I had my mother, and none of the women in my family had their fathers. But without my mother, I was lost. And now I couldn't trust anybody. So I went into the world solo and guarded, not trusting anybody, but hoping that somebody would see enough of something in me to want to prove me wrong, to want to prove to me that I was worthy and that I was capable of being loved. But trust issues and codependent relationships used to cover up my abandonment issues and broken heart were nothing more than a recipe for a drama-filled reality show that would become my life. Now, how does this apply to our Maslow's hierarchy-based model? Inside of Heart's home, basic needs, we see how broken homes yield broken hearts. And because our first homes are where we first learn to love, it is also where we first learn how to cope. When our hearts break, we have to find a way to put the pieces back together so that we can keep moving forward. Otherwise, we just get stuck. And when the pieces of our hearts go missing, i.e. an absent parent, be it physically or emotionally, we have to find new ways to hold ourselves together. And we learn to do this with people and things. With the physically absent father, an emotionally unavailable mother, a disconnected family, and no siblings in a house to share my broken heart with, I had to learn how to piece myself together as best I could at an early age. And I held myself together with friends whose homes were less broken than mine. That's why my friends were my family. They gave me that feeling of family that I was missing but yearned for. They gave me a safe space and made me feel less alone. But as I grew older and the reality set in that I would always be an outsider because I wasn't actually part of their families and I didn't feel part of my own, I learned how to hold myself together with codependent relationships and trauma bonds, leaving me to question if anyone actually loved me for me or if they just felt sorry for me because I had nowhere else to go. Afraid of the answer, I decided instead to just work my ass off to become someone they would always need so that I would never have to find out. Now, why so much detail for a past that happened nearly 20, 30 years ago? Why am I bringing up old shit? Because as an adult, these factors were the foundation for what I believed about myself. These are the details and feelings I ignored or suppressed because they didn't make me feel good about myself. But this was my love story, and I needed to understand how it began if I wanted to change how it would end. These were the underlying causes of my attachment issues that led to my behavioral issues. These are the reasons that my heart couldn't move forward. She was stuck, waiting for love to come and save her, only she didn't know what love looked like because she had lost the closest reflection of herself. Now, my ego tells me that these things don't matter because they made me strong. They made me who I am. And while that's true, they also made me feel unworthy of love and undeserving of life. And when we don't have or make the time to work through these feelings and emotions, they become the subconscious drivers of our personality, how we build and interact in relationships, and how we view ourselves. So when I'm wondering why I can only attract a certain type of person and why my dating life looked like a merry-go-round of the same script but a different cast, I know it's because I was in an endless loop of struggle love. I wanted better, and on a conscious level, I knew I deserved better, but I didn't know how to be better because I'd never seen better. So how then could I attract better? That made me angry and frustrated, not only with myself, but with my relationship partners as well. Because I knew it was just a matter of time before they saw me the same way I saw me and realized it wasn't worth it, that I wasn't worth it, and up and leave the same way the people who were supposed to love me did. An unstable foundation and unaddressed hurts make small things seem bigger. I had abandonment issues. The crack in my foundation had been exposed. I was vulnerable, naked, and sensitive. Everything hurt, and I hated it. I hated that I could feel so much. I hated love, but more importantly, I hated that I needed it so bad from people unable and unwilling to give it. Welcome to toxic behavior. And that wraps up today's episode. Just to recap, we talked about how the heart is the portal to the spiritual world, and when it's blocked, we prevent pain and negative energy from escaping and prevent love from coming in. We talked about trauma and its effects on our emotional and psychological development. And we talked about codependency and trauma bonding as unhealthy attachment styles formed in our childhood development and how that led to trust issues and a false sense of security. Most importantly, we now know how and why Heart got stuck. She was trapped and waiting for someone to come and save her. Now, as a sidebar, I think it's important to note that when you start breaking down these elements of self to the very core of who you are, it may reveal some things you're not ready to face yet. And I just want to remind you that that's okay because this is a lifelong journey and it requires a lot of patience with yourself. So be kind to you and the pieces of yourself that you've yet to become acquainted with as you travel this road. As always, I hope you found this content enlightening, and if you learned something useful to take on your journey, make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment, review, tell a friend to tell a friend. Just make sure you find your way back so you don't miss out on what's to come. And if you're interested in learning more, you can follow my Facebook page, First Generation Flyers, where you can find links to resources from the show and other ways to connect. Until next time, be safe, be loved, be you. Dope responsibly. Peace.
And I know that it ain't easy to love a girl like me, but you should know